Evening from Cairo, a capital city that's literally echoing to the sound of jubilation, whether it's office buildings out on the streets or indeed in Tahrir Square, the epicenter of this popular uprising. There is a kind of mass hysteria. Let's go right over live now to Tahrir Square. This is the place where night after night tens of thousands of people have gathered, refused to budge. They've stood firm till this day happened. A protest movement that grew out of the internet generation has managed to topple the 30-year rule of one man. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, looks at the last day of Hosni Mubarak.
In the end, the announcement came suddenly, and in Tahrir Square, they were taken by surprise. But the news only took a few seconds to sink in. People who'd been leaving after another long day of demonstrating turned around and pushed their way back into the square. It was uninhibited, raucous joy.
Egypt is a country, and we will prove to the world that we will be a strategic country where we control the Middle East, and we will never be beaten by anyone, and we are free.
Several 100,000 people were still in Tahrir Square. Some immediately started the evening prayer. Plenty just cheered and danced instead. This revolution has been supported by all kinds of Egyptians, the pious, the secular, atheists, Christians as well as Muslims. Power has been handed to the army. The military has been at the heart of the regime they hate. They want it now to deliver them a democracy led by civilians.
I just hope it's a civil state. It becomes a civil state, and the army takes this to democracy. And we've been here every single day, and today we brought our son to see this historic moment. He will read about this in books when he grows up.
They've always said that who controls Tahrir Square controls Cairo. Tonight they feel all of Egypt belongs to them. This morning the exhaustion was showing among the protesters at the State Television and Radio Centre, about half a mile from Tahrir Square. The new arrivals kept it going though. Waving shoes has become a universal symbol of contempt for leaders in Arab countries. The army had the building heavily defended, but the protesters were allowed to gather on their side of the barbed wire. Plenty of them were hoping the army would give the president the final push out of office.
They've paralyzed the center of Cairo, but their message is still not getting through to the regime. Their challenge today is to keep the pressure up on President Mubarak and to increase it if they can. The noon prayer is going to start in a couple of minutes.
The sermon said, "You are in the heart of the battle now. We must change the regime that never listened." The soldiers prayed alongside them. The protests here meant the demonstrations were spreading, and they cut the building off, depriving the regime of yet another of the tools it has used to control the people. Then in late afternoon, in jammed Tahrir Square, some signs of movement. There's an important and urgent announcement coming from the presidency soon, he said. They gathered, for once in almost perfect silence, around the loudspeakers. But it was another anticlimax. The newsreader said President Mubarak had left for Sharm el-Sheikh, the Red Sea resort. But shortly afterwards, Omar Suleiman, the vice president, made the announcement they wanted to hear.
President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down as the President of the Republic and has entrusted the High Council of the Armed Forces to carry out the dealing of the country. My God help us.
30 seconds on television ended President Mubarak's 30 years of rule. And the party began. Egypt, brutalized and stagnating under President Mubarak, has regained its position as the leader of the Arab world. thanks to its people.
The fall of President Mubarak is a moment of great historical significance, not just for Egypt, but for this entire region. In just over 2 weeks, the people have taken on a brutal police state and overthrown an authoritarian leader who appeared to be in control. Their achievement will change the Middle East.
They're feeling very good about the future, but it might not be easy. Egyptians have won the first battle. Now they want to change the system that sustained President Mubarak. Tonight, they deserve their celebration. Tomorrow, the hard work starts again. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Cairo.
Tonight, Egypt is effectively under military rule. It is the generals who've organised this transition, and it is they who hold the key to what happens next. They've said they support the reform process, and they've said they lift emergency rule eventually. Our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, looks at Egypt's future.
It's the end of 18 days during which one proud elderly man pitted himself stubbornly against the will of millions of Egyptians. The army was right in the middle, unwilling till the very end to force President Mubarak to go, yet deeply opposed to clearing the demonstrators out of Tahrir Square by sheer force. So why has he gone now, after insisting that he wouldn't? Two main reasons, it seems. The Americans, who had been embarrassed, helpless onlookers, finally summoned up all their power and influence to force the Egyptian military to get rid of Mr. Mubarak. But there was something else. The military leaders realized that cracks were starting to appear in the army's structure. Many junior officers and ordinary soldiers sided with the demonstrators. The generals backed the president, who was one of their own. There's an historical echo to this. In the 1952 revolution against the monarchy, some senior officers supported the king, while younger ones like Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser backed the coup. For 60 years, Egypt has been a military dictatorship backed by a nasty secret police force. Finally, no doubt reluctantly, the army leaders have brought Nasser's system to an end.
I think that they've come in very unwillingly at this moment, and they realise that they have to deliver for people power. The people power has become an absolutely crucial element of the atmosphere, and you might almost say what will now be the new constitution in Egypt. So I'm very optimistic. I believe that there is such a surge of positive feeling and belief in Egyptians at this moment, and we can hear them, that really this is a tremendous moment.
Tonight there's pleasure, relief and a great deal of pride in what the crowds have achieved.
After all, they've endured everything that was used against them in the square. Iron bars, rocks and finally gunshots. And they didn't leave Tahrir Square. They feel stronger and better and really proud of themselves. Perhaps tonight we can forgive them if they're letting off steam a little. John Simpson, BBC News, Cairo.
Throughout these protests, the eyes of the world have been focused on Egypt. Tonight there have been celebrations right across this region, from Beirut to Gaza. Our North America editor Mark Mardell looks now at world reaction.
President Obama hasn't always kept pace with a fast-moving crisis.
Good afternoon, everybody.
But for the last week, he has thrown his moral authority behind the demonstrators. Today, there was no doubting his passion.
The people of Egypt have spoken. Their voices have been heard, and Egypt will never be the same. By stepping down, President Mubarak responded to the Egyptian people's hunger for change. For Egyptians have made it clear that nothing less than genuine democracy will carry the day.
What a difference a few hours make. Last night, after President Mubarak refused to resign, demonstrators were literally jumping with anger. The Americans and British were really worried things were going to turn ugly and told the Egyptian military of their fears. But David Cameron made it clear the army mustn't now hold on to power.
What has happened today should only be the first step. Those who now run Egypt have a duty to reflect the wishes of the Egyptian people. And in particular, there really must be a move to civilian and democratic rule.
In New York's Little Egypt, people celebrated on the streets. In Paris, they danced in front of the Eiffel Tower. There were fireworks in Gaza. In places there's not just joy but raised expectations. Hamas are hoping for an Egyptian government that's less friendly towards Israel.
We are in urgent need for the new Egyptian government to help the Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank.
In Tel Aviv, no celebrations. The government hasn't commented. Many are concerned that Egypt, which first made peace with Israel, is now changing.
In my opinion, it is not good for the State of Israel because it will create a state of uncertainty and chaos in the whole Middle East.
In Jordan, they celebrate Egypt's revolution. Perhaps some hope for their own. Autocratic rulers all over the Middle East may be worried about Obama's soaring language.
We can't help but hear the echoes of history. Echoes from Germans tearing down a wall, Indonesian students taking to the streets, Gandhi leading his people down the path of justice.
The White House will be coping with the aftermath of this day for many years to come. Any new government in Egypt is unlikely to be more pro-American, more pro-Israeli. And if there are other demonstrations in other parts of the region, they'll bring with them risks of instability as well as opportunity. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Washington.
Well, let's go over to Jerusalem now and talk to our correspondent there, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes. Rupert, what's the reaction there? After all, Hosni Mubarak is a man they've been able to do business with all these years.
That's right, George, and there has been a stony silence here today. In fact, we understand that the Prime Minister's office has ordered cabinet members here in Israel not to make any comment to the media. And that really is because Israel does not welcome the departure of Hosni Mubarak from the presidency in Egypt. For 30 years, President Mubarak has stood behind the peace agreement with Israel, signed in 1979, and he has represented for Israel, stability and certainty in a very uncertain part of the world. So tonight, Israel now faces a much greater instability and uncertainty in its most important Arab neighbour and ally.
Rupert, thank you very much. Well, for 30 years, Hosni Mubarak has dominated this country and played a pivotal role in the region. A military man himself, he's become increasingly reliant on the security forces to maintain his vice-like grip on this nation of some 80 million people. Frank Gardner looks at Hosni Mubarak, the man.
Gone. The man they called the Pharaoh is ruler of Egypt no more. His presidency had a violent birth. Here he is as vice president being rushed to safety in 1981 when Islamist gunmen assassinated his predecessor, Anwar Sadat. That was in retaliation for this, the signing of a peace treaty with Israel. But President Mubarak made it his mission to keep that peace at great cost domestically. He put thousands of Islamist extremists behind bars, many without trial, many were tortured. The West largely turned a blind eye. When fellow extremists massacred 58 tourists at Luxor in 1997, Mubarak intensified his fight against their insurgency and beat it. To the White House, he was often seen as a beacon of stability in a troubled region, an ally worth propping up with billions of dollars in aid. But in Egypt, his whole regime had become associated with corruption, cronyism and a brutal suppression of dissent. Until this uprising, Mubarak's secret police had a fearsome reputation. Men who disappeared into their hands could be beaten, electrocuted and raped. This fear fueled the hatred so many felt towards him.
Hosni Mubarak leaves behind a broken country, broken institutions, abject poverty. More than 40% of the 84 million Egyptians live either in poverty or below the poverty line. Decadent wealth. Corruption has permeated all aspects of life. Egypt used to be the jewel of the East. Egypt today is a broken country.
Egyptian political life has been fossilized for decades. In sham elections, Mubarak's party would gain over 90% of the vote. Again, world leaders largely looked the other way. Better me and my faults, he told them, than chaos or another Iran. So now Hosni Mubarak has gone, Egypt may at last have a chance to prove there is a credible alternative to dictatorship. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
And we're going to talk to our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, now. Jeremy, what an incredible day. It didn't look possible this morning, did it?
No, it didn't, and there was a mood of grim determination, I think, in the square, and nobody really expected it was going to be wrapped up, certainly this phase anyway, by the evening. I think one thing that really matters now, George, is that Arab public opinion matters. It's a concern to people in a way that it hasn't been in the past. Now, that is going to make life difficult for Arab leaders, for the Americans, and also for the Israelis. There could be some awkward moments ahead in terms of the way they frame their policies.
Jeremy, as we stand here tonight, we can hear the celebrations going on behind us. But is it possible, given the generals are in charge, that this is just a new face on an old regime?
Well, it might be. We'll have to see. I think that depends really on how the military behaves itself, what they do. Do they bring this towards a civilian government? And also, this is the new very important factor, how the public react to that. Certainly the people I've been talking to here have no patience whatever for the idea of the military simply retreading the old regime and bringing out another general. Don't forget that every president up to now in Egypt in modern times has come from the military, and that's what the people on these streets tonight do not want to happen again.
All right, Jeremy, thanks very much. Well, let me give you a reminder of a special live page on our website, updated continuously with the latest developments. It's at bbc.co.uk/news. And there's also continuing coverage on the